Hello, my name is Dr. Susan Blank, and I'm an endocrinologist who works with the Virginia Department of Health. Welcome back to the second nutrition session for the Virginia Healthy Heart Ambassador Blood Pressure Self-Monitoring Program. Today we're going to be building on our last session, which was about the DASH approach to eating and learning how we can further reduce blood pressure by reducing sodium intake. I'd like this to be as interactive as possible, so there are going to be a few points along the way where I pose some discussion questions and invite you to temporarily pause the video so that you can share your own thoughts, ideas, and experiences, and then you can resume the video when you're ready. Let's get started. Today, we're going to start by talking about what sodium actually is, then go on to review some nutrition and blood pressure facts, talk about how to go about reducing sodium intake, work through some examples where we choose the healthier option, and then finish by talking about the low sodium lifestyle and why it works to lower blood pressure and cardiovascular risk. It's important to understand the distinction between sodium and salt. So sodium is a mineral that the human body needs for a variety of things. It's important for fluid maintenance. Sodium bonds to water and pulls it into the bloodstream and keeps it in the body. It's also important for nerve impulses and muscle function. But even though sodium is really important, we actually need very little in the way of dietary sodium. It only takes about 500 milligrams per day of dietary sodium to keep the body working properly. Common table salt is sodium chloride, and about 40% of the weight of sodium chloride is made up of the sodium component, and about 90% of American sodium intake comes from salt. The recommendations for sodium intake are that adults get no more than 2,300 milligrams per day, and the recommendations are even lower, under 1,500 milligrams per day, for people who have high blood pressure or other risk factors for heart disease. And those 2,300 and 1,500 milligram numbers may sound familiar because they're the same recommendations that are part of the newer versions of the DASH diet, which we talked about in our last session. The problem is 9 out of 10 Americans consume more than the recommended amount of sodium, and the average American consumes 3,400 milligrams of sodium per day. So that's 1.5 times the 2,300 milligrams per day recommendation and over 2 times the lower 1,500 milligrams per day recommendation. How is all that extra sodium affecting our bodies? We know that consuming too much sodium leads to excess sodium in the bloodstream, and that excess sodium in the bloodstream in turn is going to pull excess fluid into the bloodstream. That's going to lead the total blood volume in the body to increase and also the blood pressure to increase. And I think it's helpful to think of an analogy of a garden hose, with the hose itself being equivalent to a blood vessel and then the water flowing through the hose being like the blood flowing through the blood vessels. So if you turn on the hose a regular amount, you'll have a nice smooth flow of water through the hose. And if you keep turning it up further, you can increase the water pressure by increasing the amount of water flowing through the hose. And if you turn it up way too much, you might notice that the pressure gets so high that it starts to distend and stretch out the hose, and it can come out really forcefully, more forcefully than you would like. And the similar thing is happening in the body. All that extra pressure is putting extra pressure on the heart and also the blood vessels, and this leads to strain on the heart that can cause the heart to get enlarged, to start to not function as well, and eventually lead to heart failure. And then it can cause damage to the blood vessels, both the big blood vessels, which can lead to things like heart attacks and strokes, and also little teeny tiny blood vessels, which can lead to problems with kidney function and also vision. Who should be most concerned about their sodium intake? The people who should be most concerned are people who have medical conditions, including hypertension, diabetes, and chronic kidney disease, as well as people who fall in demographic groups that put them at higher risk for those conditions, including being African American or being over the age of 50. However, it's important to establish healthy nutrition and lifestyle habits regardless of your current health status in order to promote health and prevent chronic disease. So it's good for everyone to be mindful of their sodium intake. Now we're going to move on and talk about reducing sodium intake. If you're anything like me, you probably have a hard time wrapping your mind around what milligrams of sodium actually look like. So I think it's helpful to start by learning how to convert milligrams of sodium into teaspoons of salt. So earlier on, we learned that it only takes around 500 milligrams per day of sodium to keep the body running properly. Just take a minute for fun and think about how many teaspoons of sodium you think would amount to 500 milligrams. And how many teaspoons of sodium do you think might be the equivalent of that 2,300 milligram target that we're all supposed to be keeping under? So it turns out that 1/4 teaspoon of salt equals 575 milligrams of sodium. So to keep your body running properly, you need under 1/4 teaspoon of salt a day. 1/2 teaspoon of salt equals 1,150 milligrams of sodium. 3/4 teaspoon of salt equals 1,725 milligrams of sodium. And 1 teaspoon of salt is the equivalent of the 2,300 milligram sodium target for everybody across the United States. But remember, a lot of us need to try to consume less than 1,500 milligrams of sodium per day, and that would be less than 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt per day. So pretty small quantities. And one really important thing to understand is that those recommended limits are for all the sodium that we have in the course of a day, not just what we're adding from our salt shaker. So this is salt that's naturally occurring in food and what's added to foods that we're purchasing. So where does the sodium in our diet actually come from? This chart shows data from a study that looked at sources of sodium intake in the American diet. And it actually found that very little, just 6%, which is this little green sliver here, comes from salt that's added while we're eating. So that's salt from the salt shaker at the table. Another little bit, this green sliver, which is 5%, consists of salt that's added to food while we're cooking it. Around 12% is naturally occurring in sodium in food, but the vast majority, 77%, comes from processed and restaurant foods. And the real challenge here is it's hard to know how much sodium is in some of those foods, and also we have limited control over it. More than 75% of the sodium that we eat comes from processed foods. And salt is added to those foods for a variety of reasons. It can help preserve foods, it can help keep foods moist, and it can also enhance flavor. And some of the categories of foods that are high in salt are ones that you might expect. Others can be pretty surprising for a lot of people. So you might expect chips, pretzels, salty snacks have a lot of salt in them, but also bread and rolls, tortillas, processed meats, including cold cuts, cheeses, condiments, including mayonnaise, ketchup, and mustard, sauces like soy sauce, tomato sauce, salad dressings, and also canned goods like canned vegetables and beans and soups. The American Heart Association has a group of foods that it calls its Salty Six, and these are foods that we should especially be on the lookout for because they're often high in sodium. So these include bread and rolls, cold cuts and cured meats, soup, and then the next three are foods that often have combinations of high sodium ingredients. So the first is sandwiches, which includes bread, often cheese, cold cuts, and condiments that are high in sodium. Pizza, which has a bread component with a crust along with cheese. Tomato sauce can be high in sodium, and often people will add cured meats like pepperoni or ham to it. And then things like burritos and tacos, which have tortillas, which can be high in sodium, along with often cheese and some high sodium seasonings and sauces. Since most of the sodium that we take in comes from packaged foods, it's really helpful to have some familiarity with reading nutrition labels. This is a can of tomato sauce that I pulled out of my pantry. And to start, we'll take a look at the sodium line. You'll usually find this about half the way down the nutrition label. And there are going to be two different numbers on that sodium line. The first you see here is the sodium content in milligrams. So this has 270 milligrams. The other number that you're going to see, which is over on the right side, is the percent daily value. So for sodium, this is calculated based on a goal of 2,300 milligrams per day. So if that's the target you're trying to reach, this can be a really helpful number to look at. However, if you're trying to reach the 1,500 milligram target, this is going to underestimate what percent of your daily goal that type of food has in it. The other thing that you're always going to want to take a look at is a serving size, which you find up at the top. So this is how they calculate all the rest of these numbers here. And it's important to take a look at it and compare it to how you're actually going to use the food. So for example, this is tomato sauce. The serving size here is 1/4 cup. But if I was going to use this for a pasta sauce, I would probably give each person more on the order of 1/2 cup. So if I'm going to eat 1/2 cup of this per person, then I'm going to need to double all the numbers that I see down here. So you can see using this, you can try to figure out how much sodium is in your foods. It's a good way to be able to compare different brands to see which one has more or less sodium, and it'll help you get a sense as to how much you're eating in the course of a day. You may have also noticed that some foods have claims on the label regarding how much sodium they have in them. Most of these claims are regulated and have a specific meaning to them, so I think it's helpful to run through what those meanings are. If something says it's sodium free, it means that it has less than 5 milligrams of sodium per serving and contains no sodium chloride, a regular table salt. If it says it's very low sodium, that means it has no more than 35 milligrams per serving. If it says it's low sodium, it has to have no more than 140 milligrams per serving. If it says it's reduced sodium, that means it has at least 25% or less sodium per serving compared to the usual sodium of that product. So that would usually be a brand that has the regular version and then they have a reduced sodium version. And then light is a designation for low calorie and low fat foods that contain at least 50% reduced sodium per serving. So this is another thing that's helpful to look at. I think now is a good time for some group discussion. Here are some possible topics. Were you surprised by any of the types of foods that are high in sodium? What do you think some of the major sources of sodium are in your diet? What are some ideas that you have about how you could potentially reduce your sodium intake? So if you want to take a few minutes now, pause the video, and then when you're ready, you can push play to resume. Welcome back. I hope you're able to have a good discussion and share some thoughts and ideas with each other. Now we're going to move on and talk about some tangible ways to reduce sodium intake. One good way to reduce sodium intake is to follow the DASH eating plan that we discussed at our last nutrition session. This is true because the DASH eating plan is naturally low in sodium even before they added the specific sodium limitations. It is high in low sodium foods, including fruits and vegetables, and low in high sodium foods, including highly processed foods and processed and cured meats. When you do your grocery shopping, you can buy more fruits and vegetables, which are naturally low in sodium, and fresh, frozen, and no salt added canned vegetables are all good options there. You don't have to stick with only fresh, especially when they're out of season. You can try to buy more fresh poultry, lean meat, and fish in place of processed meats. Also limit highly processed and prepared foods, which tend to be high in sodium. And when you do buy those foods, read the nutrition labels and compare the sodium levels, and then try to pick out the ones that have the lowest sodium levels. Also, you can look for versions of products that say low sodium, reduced sodium, or no salt added. There are also some things that you can do at home. The first is to prepare your own food whenever you can. When you cook, you have control over exactly how much salt is going into things. You can use herbs and spices to add flavor to foods instead of adding salt. You can rinse canned vegetables and beans to remove excess salt. And you can also just take the salt shaker off your dinner table so that you won't be tempted to use it. And what most people find is that gradually over time, your taste buds adapt and you won't miss the salt. You may even find some foods that you used to enjoy too salty. When you're eating out, if nutrition information is available, you want to choose options that are lowest in sodium. Information won't always be available. It won't be available at smaller mom and pop restaurants, but it should be available at most of the chain restaurants. You also can try to limit your intake of dishes that are often high in sodium. So those are things like pizza, sandwiches, burritos, and tacos that fall in that AHA salty 6. And also ask for sauces, condiments, and salad dressings on the side so that you have more control over how much of those you eat. Now we're going to work through some meal options and try to figure out which one is lower in sodium. So the way this is going to work is I'm going to lay out two different options for each meal, and then I'm going to ask you to pause the video. You can talk about which one you think is lower in sodium and why, and when you're ready, you can resume the video and find out the answer. So let's start with breakfast. For breakfast, option number one is a breakfast sandwich with 1 egg, 1 slice of cheddar cheese, and turkey bacon on a whole wheat English muffin with a cup of water. And the second option is yogurt with oats, blueberries, and sliced banana with a cup of water. Okay, go ahead and pause the video now. The lower sodium option for breakfast would be the yogurt with oats, blueberries, and a sliced banana with a cup of water. If we look at the other option, the first tip off that it might be high in sodium is that it is a sandwich, and we know that sandwiches fall on that salty 6 list from the American Heart Association. And this particular sandwich has several components which are often high in sodium, including the bread in the form of the English muffin, as well as the cheddar cheese and turkey bacon. Let's move on to lunch. For lunch, the first option is a Greek salad with spinach, tomatoes, cucumbers, low-fat feta cheese, Kalamata olives, pepperoncini, and Greek salad dressing with a cup of water. And the second option is a whole wheat wrap with tomatoes, spinach, black beans, avocado, olive oil, and balsamic vinegar. Stop the video for a minute here and come back when you've figured out which one you think is lowest in sodium. The best option for lunch is that whole wheat wrap with tomatoes, spinach, black beans, avocado, olive oil, and balsamic vinegar. If we look at the salad, we usually think of salads as being healthy, which they are, but this particular salad has a number of high sodium components. The first being that feta cheese, which is often high in sodium, along with the Kalamata olives and pepperoncini, which are both stored in a salty solution. And then salad dressings, including Greek dressing, are often high in sodium. Now we're going to move on to dinner. The first option is a grilled chicken with brown rice, steamed broccoli, and a cup of milk. And the second is a turkey burger with lettuce, tomato, onion, ketchup, mustard, and Swiss cheese on a whole wheat bun with baked sweet potato wedges and a cup of water. So pause the video for a few minutes and try to figure out which one you think is lower in sodium. The best dinner option is the grilled chicken with brown rice, steamed broccoli, and a cup of milk. And if we look at the other option, again, a burger is kind of a version of a sandwich, which should tip us off that maybe this is going to be high in sodium. And then if we look at the components of it, along with the bread, there's cheese on it and also multiple condiments, the ketchup and mustard, which tend to be high in sodium. So that makes this the higher sodium choice. Now, to take it to the next level, I'd like you to pause the video one more time and look through the higher sodium options and see if you can come up with any ideas about how you could potentially reduce the amount of sodium in them. I'll see you in a couple of minutes. Welcome back. I hope you're able to come up with some good ideas. When I was thinking through things for that breakfast sandwich, you could try to find a low sodium version of cheddar cheese, and I would also probably take off the turkey bacon and substitute it with something else, maybe a tomato or some spinach. For lunch, with that Greek salad, for the feta cheese, I would again look for a lower sodium version of that and then maybe cut back or leave off entirely the Kalamata olives and the pepperoncini. And then it's always good, if possible, to ask for the dressing on the side. That way you can really control how much of it you're getting. And for dinner, you could again ask for the ketchup and mustard on the side so that you could control them and look for a low sodium version of cheese. Another good thing to know with sandwiches, sometimes it can be a little bit messy, but one way to reduce the sodium is to try to do an open face sandwich, and that way you only have one piece of bread, and that way you've reduced the sodium in that way. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Why does reducing sodium work? It contributes to healthy nutrition and lifestyle habits, which can help promote health and prevent chronic disease. It reduces fluid retention, which can help with weight management and also blood pressure management. And ultimately, most people feel better when they're on a lower sodium diet. It eliminates bloating and weight gain associated with fluid retention, and it also makes it a lot easier to manage blood pressure. Now that you've learned some about where sodium is found in the diet, about how to reduce it, and about why reducing sodium intake can be so important for blood pressure management and overall health, I'm hoping we can move on and have a good group discussion where you can share some thoughts and ideas about how you can possibly implement some of these changes in your own day-to-day life. Here are some possible topics for discussion. Think about what you have eaten today or yesterday. What kinds of foods have you eaten that would help you reduce your sodium intake? And how can you change some of your food choices so that you are taking in less sodium throughout the day? Think about a time when you have eaten something that is really salty or had a day consuming a lot of salt. How did you feel afterwards? Have you noticed how salt affects your blood pressure? Think about all the kinds of low sodium foods that you can purchase at the grocery store. After learning about reducing your sodium intake and what low sodium means on a label, what can you do to ensure that you aren't taking in too much sodium? This is a good time to stop the video. I hope you can have a good group discussion and share your thoughts and ideas. Welcome back. Let's finish up with the last couple slides. Although these sessions focus primarily on nutrition, I want to finish up with one quick minute on physical activity and blood pressure management. Regular physical activity can lead to a significant reduction in blood pressure and can also improve other cardiovascular risks. And the recommendation for most people is that you get at least 150 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity a week. And moderate intensity means that it should be the equivalent of a brisk walk where you can still continue a conversation, but you couldn't sing. And here are some tips to help you stay motivated and consistently exercising. The first is to find forms of movement you enjoy. This is really important to stay motivated and to keep coming back and regularly exercising. Walking is a great exercise because it's easy to do almost anywhere and it doesn't require a lot of equipment other than just some good shoes. So that's a good place for most people to start, but you may find that you really enjoy swimming or dancing or doing group exercise classes. So just find something that you like and stick with it, or find a few things that you like and mix it up if that works better for you. The next is to make it social. It can be a lot more fun if you work out with a friend, and it can also add some helpful accountability and also encouragement. And you're much less likely to skip a workout if you know that somebody else is counting on you to be there with them. Also, you can try something called temptation bundling, and that's combining exercise with something that you really do enjoy and look forward to if exercise is a little bit more of a chore for you. So this may look like listening to a really exciting audiobook that you're looking forward to, or a favorite podcast while you're walking, or promising that yourself that you're only going to watch your guilty pleasure TV show when you're on the treadmill, something like that. And also, if finding time is an issue and barrier for you, you can consider doing your exercise in smaller chunks. So instead of trying to get 30 minutes all at once, you can do 10 minutes 3 times a day. This concludes today's session. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I look forward to seeing you back next time when we're going to be talking a little bit more about how to shop and cook and ways to support healthy blood pressure management. In the meantime, keep up the great work monitoring and tracking your blood pressure. Hopefully you'll see some improvement in the numbers as you make some changes to reduce your sodium intake. Thank you and have a great day.